Today on Sports Cards 101, we're talking PSA grading Q&A. You've got questions, we've got answers. Here we go. Welcome back to Sports Cards 101 with Joe. Today we are talking PSA grading Q&A. And what I mean by that is there are a number of questions that we regularly receive from submitters. And today we want to give you answers to some of those questions to help you better understand the PSA grading process. Of course, we've been working with PSA for over 25 years, as well as the other leading grading companies dating back for decades. And we know a lot about the industry. I want to provide as much of that knowledge to you as I can. And today specifically we're talking about PSA. So first of all, we often get asked, why should I grade my cards in the first place, whether it be with PSA or another company? Grading your cards, I think the biggest benefit is it helps the cards achieve more liquidity. It's much easier. Let's take a 65 mantle, for instance. Say you've got a 65 mantle. You walk into a card shop and you want to sell it, and you say, this card, believe this is a nice near mint 65 mantle. And they're like, well, no, to us, it looks more VG to EX. And you're like, well, no, I'm sure it's near mint. And they're like, no, we can only make you an offer based upon it being, in the VG to EX range. Once that card is graded with PSA, they have set basically they've created a market value based upon what the grade is. You can receive that card back from PSA or back from us if you're submitting through us, and you can immediately take that card and say it's a PSA 5, PSA 7, whatever. You can look it up online and you can see what that card has been selling for. Whereas with your raw card, it's much harder to determine the current market value. So liquidity is one of the biggest things. Demand for the card is often increased once it's graded. Now the card doesn't necessarily go up in value just because it's graded. There's some companies out there on eBay, they do a fantastic job with selling raw cards. And they show a big scan of the card and they let the buyer make a decision, and sometimes they get really strong prices for raw cards. So grading doesn't automatically make your card worth more. However, it does make it easier to resell, especially in the situation I just described. If there's some different understanding or different interpretation of what the grade is, you can let PSA set that standard, determine what the grade is, and then if you totally disagree with the grade, then don't sell it that way. But if you are in agreement with the grade they assign, then it makes it much easier to carry out a transaction. Now for those who are regular submitters with us, sometimes cards will come back not graded for a variety of reasons. We probably answer more emails and take more phone calls about these than any other cards, trying to understand why wasn't my card graded. So let's start with the one that has brings about the most confusion. And that's when a card comes back in the original sleeve, not graded, and it says min size required. People go, what in the world does that mean? So what this means is that card, when it was examined by PSA and they measure it, it did not meet the minimum size requirement for that issue. So what PSA is saying is they believe that particular card is basically undersized for that product. It means it was cut incorrectly at the factory. There's some type of measurement it doesn't meet the measurement size that it should. And so say it's supposed to be 2.5 by 3.5 and it's just slightly under. So PSA has had this same standard since they started, where cards have to meet a certain size measurement or they won't grade them. I literally had a conversation one-on-one with their head grader about this topic just a few weeks ago. And he said, I inherited this standard, because I told him, I said, this is one thing that so many submitters are upset about, they send in a pack fresh card and it comes back ungraded. And he told me, this is a standard he inherited. This has been the way it's been done. They're going to continue with that standard, the measurement standard. And so when you get a card back that says men's size required, it doesn't mean they think the card has been trimmed. They don't believe it's been altered. They believe that it was a factory error and it wasn't cut correctly at the factory. Therefore, it will not get graded. One other reason that cards often are not graded by PSA, and that is when they are miscut. So as opposed to men's size where they're undersized, miscut means the card has been miscut so badly that there's a reason PSA won't grade it. Sometimes it means the card's like diamond cut, which you often see like with 86 Fleer stickers, or the back is miscut, meaning that the front may look great, it may even be centered, but the back is miscut so badly that you see part of another card on the back. So in those instances, PSA typically will not grade the card. All right, so let's move on to some of the others. Sometimes you'll get a card back and it says no holder. And you say, of course PSA has a holder that size. What does that mean? No holder typically means that this card is not in their database. Sometimes it could be say it's a very unique overseas issue. For whatever reason, PSA doesn't have the card in their database. Maybe it means it's an unlicensed card, which they won't grade. Maybe it's sometimes this will happen with a in-person autograph, and you've sent it on the standard service, and PSA won't grade those. It would have to go to the dual service because it was an in-person autograph. Maybe it was a pack-pulled autograph prior to 1998, because PSA only, if you send it through their regular submission service, like with us, it's down to $20 a card in quantity. If you send it on that service level, they will only grade pack-pulled autographs from 98 and newer. And so if you have like a 1992 Proline autograph, you send that in, they won't grade that unless it is sent in on the dual service. And the reason is there were so many backdoor autos, cards that went out the back doors, and they weren't necessarily authentic autographs. A lot of stuff was done auto pen and so forth back in the early 90s. So that's their cutoff year. So maybe it's basically saying you've got to send this to our dual service where a autograph authenticator will thoroughly examine this auto, even if it was a pack-pulled auto. So there's multiple reasons why you may get back a no holder. Now let's talk about the ones that really hurt when they charge you the full grading fee, even though you think it's a perfect card, you think it's a beautiful card, but they come back in one of two ways. One of three ways. Card might come back trimmed, and it says it on the semi-rigid that you've sent it in, it says trimmed, which means PSA believe that card has been cut, the stock has been manipulated in some way, and part of the card stock has been removed. Trimmed, there's less of the card there now than there was originally. PSA is not going to grade that. The other is altered. This is typically the card stock has been altered. Typically, they're not saying any of it's been removed. It could still be, all of the card is still there, but it's been pressed in some way, possibly. Now, what is really frustrating to a lot of submitters is we've seen this countless times with Jordan rookies from 1986 Fleer. A customer comes in and he's proud. He goes, here's my Jordan rookie. I've had it in this 1-inch screw down for 30 years. And I immediately have to warn them, I'm like, that's not a good thing. And the reason is, if you remember the old 1-inch screw downs, they still make them, but I highly do not recommend them. But we used to sell a ton of them because people wanted to put their card in the thickest holder out there, and they'd show off their beautiful card in a 1-inch screw down. But what happens in those thick screw downs, it doesn't have to be a 1-inch, it could be a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch screw down. It really comes down to how tightly did that card get pressed and screwed down in the holder. And so what happens is when you've had a card that's been in a screw down for decades, sometimes shorter than that, but often we see, for example, the 86 Fleer Jordans, and the customer comes in, that card's been pressed. When you take that screw down and you've tightened those all four corners, what you've done is you've put additional pressure on the corners of the cards, and then when PSA examines the card, that corner looks like it's been pressed down because it has been. Now, unscrupulous collectors who are trying to get higher grades have done this for decades. They'll press a corner to flatten it out, to make it look sharper, to make it look cleaner. And so PSA has to make a determination that card, and they'll say this card has been altered. Now, when you were a 12-year-old and you put your Jordan rookie in a screw down, you weren't trying to alter the card stock. You wanted to present it better. But what has happened over time with Jordan rookies and countless other cards that have been put in screw downs is the stock has been altered from years of pressure on those corners. And so many times we will get back cards for submitters and they'll say altered. And they're upset and they're like, hey, I did nothing wrong to that card. And we believe them. But again, PSA, they don't know whether you did that as a 12-year-old or you did it recently trying to make the card look better. All they know is that the card stock appears to be altered, therefore they won't grade it. Another one that's a little more obvious is recolored. This happens when someone has taken some type of external instrument marker, let's say Sharpie, whatever, magic marker, crayon, ink pen, you name it, pencil, whatever, and they've altered basically the cardstock by recoloring a corner, an edge, it could be the tip, whatever. I see this so often with let's take 71 Topps baseball, for instance. Of course, those who know about 71 Topps baseball, you know it had a dark black border, and it's also one of the hardest worst condition sets out there. It is so hard to find these in high grade. I'll never forget a time I was at a trade show in Atlantic City decades ago, and a dealer had a beautiful 71 Aaron card out. And of course, being from Atlanta and being a huge Aaron fan, I was interested in the card. And I looked at it and said, wow, that's a great looking Aaron. And he said, yeah, I need double book for that card. And I thought, well, I don't mind paying, I think book at the time was $40, $50. And I was like, I don't mind paying double book for that because I thought it's going to grade so high, I would consider it. So I pick it up and I look at it closer and I said, wait a minute, this card has black Sharpie. The card's been touched up on the edge of the card to make the border look better. And the dealer said, okay, how about half book? So he went from double book to half book in the blink of an eye, which I didn't want the card at all because it had been altered and recolored. But that's just one example. Another one we see is 86 clear Jordans with a red Sharpie or red magic marker touching up the border to make it look cleaner than it really was. So recoloring happens way too often in our industry. And this is, of course, another thing that can happen to a card where PSA won't grade the card and they will charge you for it in full because they've examined it and it has been altered by recoloring. So there's just a few of the examples, the key examples that we see when cards come back not graded. And so hopefully that's given you a little bit of education. Again, there's min size, card is undersized in some way. Recolored, as we just talked about, card has been touched up. The altered, which is typically means the card's been pressed in some way. And then trimmed, meaning the card has been cut. It could be the very corner, it could be a whole border. But now I want to quickly talk about the differences with some of these. One request we do get, sometimes customers will say, hey, I know the card's been altered, I just want it slabbed as authentic. That's something we can do. We have to do that on a separate independent invoice. And you do have to request that on the front end. If you're aware of, if you know the card's been altered and you just want it labeled as altered authentic, we can do that. But let me touch on a couple of differences. We're mainly focused on PSA, but I want to touch on a couple of differences with some of the other grading companies, specifically with the altered and pressed cards. Now, SGC recently made a change where if you have like a trimmed card, recolored, they used to reject those. Now they will slab them and they will just put authentic, and they may just put altered, or they may say trimmed and label what has happened to the card, but they'll still that's just kind of an automatic thing they will do if you request that on the front end. They'll say, slab, even if it's altered in some way. But one big thing we see, a big difference specifically between PSA and SGC, is on the altered status when a card has been pressed. PSA, I think, has the strictest, most stringent determination when it comes to a pressed card, because oftentimes we will see a card come back and PSA won't grade it and they'll say altered. We've looked at it, the submitter knows the history of it, and we're like, okay, we don't see anything with this. We look at it under a loop, we don't see it. Maybe it wasn't a screw down for years, and maybe there's a slight variance in the cardboard stock. But there was no ill intent. It was just, hey, it was in a screw down, therefore there's a slight variance in the cardboard stock. We have had success, or I should say our submitters have had success trying those with other companies in the past, specifically SGC and BGS. We've had multiple customers get back Jordan rookies that were labeled altered with PSA, and they said, okay, please try it somewhere else because I know I didn't alter this card. And yes, maybe I had it in a screw down or whatever the case was for that particular submitter, but they know it's an authentic Jordan and they want it slabbed. So we've had some instances where it would get slabbed and labeled altered by another company, and some instances where it would pass their screening process and would get labeled with an actual grade. So I always warn customers, warn submitters on the front end, especially if they walk in with cards and screw downs. That's my first word of advice is, okay, we need to look at these really closely, because depending on which company you're going with, you may be getting these back ungraded, which can be very disappointing, and of course especially when you're paying the full grading fee as well. So that is something to consider. We've had some customers shy away from PSA on Jordan rookies for that very reason. If they had it in a screw down and say, I'm going to go with SGC or BGS. So that's something to consider if you have Jordan rookies, or if you have other big money cards that have been. I have a submitter who came in yesterday who's had his Mantle collection put away for years and years, and I'm afraid they're probably in screw downs because those have been his prized cards for decades, and he told me he's going to bring them in. So I'm hoping that they're in a notebook, or hoping they're in top loads, but we will see what they look like when he brings them in. But hopefully this has given you a little bit of advice, a little bit of wisdom, a little bit of understanding, because again, we get asked these questions all the time. We have so many new submitters submitting through our grading services that we are constantly educating new submitters about PSA policies and procedures and how they examine cards. If this is all scary to you and you say, hey, I really want to get some cards graded, I want them to have more liquidity, I want to understand what the grades are, and I want to know what I could resell them for on a marketplace like eBay, but I really don't know how to get started, that's what we're here for. You can go on our website, GotBaseballCards.com. You can choose PSA, you can choose any of the other great companies we work with. We provide the same type of service on the front end for any of the companies. We provide free pre-screening. We only charge you if you choose not to send a card that we've rejected. We have a lot of submitters, they get us to pre-screen it, then they say, thanks for letting me know what the estimated grades are, but I want to send them anyway, and that's fine. Then there's no charge at all for our labor on that. We only charge you something if we screen the cards out and you say, no, don't grade them. So it's a very unique service we're very proud to offer. We've been doing it for a long time. Again, we've been working with submitters for over 25 years, and we're here to help you as well. So we hope you like this video. I hope you will comment, because we would love to hear other questions. This is just a snapshot of a few questions we receive about PSA grading. There's many, many more we hope to answer in future episodes. So let us know what you'd like to hear. We love providing education to collectors in the hobby. That's what we're here for. So if you're in the Metro Atlanta area, I hope you will come out and visit our retail store Monday through Saturday. And again, wherever you are across the face of the globe, we can help you out with your collection as well. Just visit our website, GotBaseballCards.com. So thanks for watching today, and we will see you next time for the next episode of Sports Cards 101. Thanks so much.